U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio has expressed hopes that the Iranian people could overthrow their government amidst the ongoing U.S. and Israeli war against Iran. Now, this as the United Nations continues to warn that the risk of a humanitarian fallout in the region was also growing fast, particularly the number of civilians being killed and the destruction of civilian infrastructure. Iran has threatened to attack any ships seeking to pass through the Strait of Hormuz, a move that could choke a fifth of the global oil flows and likely send the price of crude oil skyrocketing, affecting energy costs around the world. Now, Rubio was speaking to reporters after a closed-door briefing with U.S. lawmakers in Washington yesterday.
There's two reasons why now. The first is it was abundantly clear that if Iran came under attack by anyone, the United States or Israel or anyone, they were going to respond and respond against the United States. The orders had been delegated down to the field commanders. It was automatic, and in fact, it bared to be true because, in fact, within an hour of the initial attack on the leadership compound, the missile forces in the south and in the north, for that matter, had already been activated to launch. In fact, those had already been pre-positioned. The third is the assessment that was made that if we stood and waited for that attack to come first before we hit them, we would suffer much higher casualties. And so the president made the very wise decision. We knew that there was going to be an Israeli action. We knew that that would precipitate an attack against American forces. And we knew that if we didn't preemptively go after them before they launched those attacks, we would suffer higher casualties and perhaps even higher those killed. And then we would all be here answering questions about why we knew that and didn't act.
All right, let's delve deeper into this. For more on this, let's now speak to SABC News Correspondent Sherwin Bryce-Pease, who's live for us in New York. Sherwin, a very good afternoon to you. So, as this conflict escalates regionally, I mean, the impacts are already being felt globally. And of course, the ripple effects we are seeing on the markets tell a story of their own. I mean, what's the latest then from where you are?
Well, I'll give you this. There is an individual that really pays attention to what happens on the stock market here in the United States. When it's up, he enjoys talking about it. When it's down, he doesn't really talk too much about it. And that is U.S. President Donald Trump. And I'll tell you what, the markets are crashing right now. The Dow Jones, Unati, down 1,100 points at the opening here about 30 minutes ago. The S&P 500 is down 140 points. The Nasdaq is down almost 500 points. That begins to affect Americans here at home. Oil prices are surging, which means petrol, or what they call gas prices here in the United States, will be going up. And you're going to see the ripple effects, right? When you talk about the closure or the risk of closure of the Strait of Hormuz, where such large volumes, 13 million barrels of oil pass through that Strait of Hormuz every day, 20% of global liquefied gas exports from those Gulf countries that too are now finding themselves within the conflagration of this war. Iran targeting, retaliating in the region, punitively seeking to inflict some damage and hurt on U.S. interests in the region. You'll understand there are a number of U.S. bases, but also the violation here of sacrosanct elements of the UN Charter in terms of territorial integrity and the sovereignty of states. So the numbers here are going to have a global effect. The United Nations yesterday was talking about how this is going to impact globally. And of course, in those instances, Unati, it is the weakest, it is the most vulnerable people in our societies everywhere that tend to suffer. So a very, very concerning time here in terms of the expansion of this conflict and the economic costs that will now be inflicted on the world writ large.
Absolutely. I mean, having listened to Marco Rubio speaking there to reporters after that closed-door briefing with U.S. lawmakers in Washington, I want us to get into that then. I mean, how are lawmakers responding to the narrative that is put out by the Trump administration, seeking to justify this military action by the U.S.?
I'm curious listening to Marco Rubio, the U.S. Secretary of State. He's also Donald Trump's national security advisor. And he says that if Iran came under attack, they were going to respond, and therefore we attacked first. This is the circular notion of how this is being framed, right? The administration has also initially indicated that the aim here was regime change, right? They decapitated the leadership of Iran and hoped there would be sort of an uprising from Iranian citizens in overtaking the government. And you saw that sort of pulled back by the likes of Pete Hegseth, the U.S. Secretary of Defense yesterday, talking about how it might be the cause of the decapitation, that there would be regime change, but it wasn't the goal of the administration. Their goal is to take out Iran's ballistic missile capacity, the ability of its navy to operate and stop the passage of traffic in the Strait of Hormuz. And the inability of Iran to fund and support its proxies in the region. So the engagement with Congress is going to be front and center in the days ahead. As you well know, Nati, the United States Congress is seeking to pass what is called a war powers resolution, essentially an effort here by Democrats and some Republicans in the main to put the cat back in the bag, if you will, seeking to curtail or even stop this unilateral military action by the United States executive here that did not seek congressional approval. There's something called the War Powers Act in the U.S. That gives power to the United States Congress in terms of foreign hostile actions by the United States. And what Congress is seeking now to do is to insert themselves in this conversation. Chuck Schumer is the leader of Democrats in the United States Senate. After that Rubio briefing on Capitol Hill yesterday, he told reporters that they found their answers completely and totally insufficient. Hakeem Jeffries is the leader of Democrats in the House of Representatives. He said the administration has failed to provide any justification for these preemptive strikes. Nothing has been presented to justify what's taken place up until this point, Unati, and the administration has an obligation to be able to prove that Iran was prepared to strike the United States. That's what, there's a conversation about the existential threat that countries faced from the United States, from Iran, including the United States. And so there is not broad consensus here moving forward in terms of Congress's role. And so we look forward to seeing the narratives and the debates that come out in the days ahead in terms of where we go from here.
And sadly, of course, Sherwin, there's that warning by the United Nations, talking about a risk of a humanitarian fallout in the region, which it says is also growing fast. I mean, we're hearing of numbers up to 700 of people who have died. Then, of course, we saw that mass funeral ceremony in Iran of 165 school girls as well as staff.
Over 700 killed in Iran already. The numbers are rising also in Israel. We understand close to a dozen people have been killed in Israel. 6 U.S. service members have now been confirmed dead. The message from the administration is that those numbers are likely to go up. The message from the administration is that we're sending more forces to the region. Donald Trump on Truth Social yesterday talking about the United States having munition stockpiles that have never been higher or better. We have virtually an unlimited supply of these weapons. War can be fought forever and successfully using these supplies. So we're talking about a continued escalation here. And your question speaks to the humanitarian context, the civilians that are being targeted who become collateral damage in these moments. Ask the Gazans in Gaza, right? Ask Palestinians in Gaza what that looks like. And it comes in the context of the humanitarian community writ large being under pressure. Funding has been cut by among actors like the United States. And so when you have a military escalation and depleted resources to respond to the emergencies that then come from that, this is the context we find ourselves in today.
Absolutely, Sherwin. Thank you so much for that update. Sherwin Bryce-Pease, live for us in New York.